Bernie Ledden, who was my high school buddy, we had played in bands together for a couple of years and helped get me into the Eagles. And Don and Glenn, during the course of the whole Eagles career, they are great leaders.
Don Felder was never a spotlight-celebrated icon. He was forged in silence, perseverance, exclusion, and the quiet riffs that echoed from behind the curtain. In the world of the Eagles, where lead singers had their names etched into legend, Felder was the one who wrote the music that left the world breathless, then was cast out like a stranger who had never belonged. He wasn't the front man. He didn't hold the microphone. He didn't chase the limelight. But listen to Hotel California just once and you'll know. A soul poured his entire heart into every note, and that soul was Don Felder. With his Gibson Les Paul, steady gaze backstage, and hands that wove otherworldly melodies, he became unforgettable, without ever needing to step into center stage. For nearly 3 decades, he soared with the Eagles to the heights of American rock, until one morning he was dismissed with a short phone call. No farewell, no final meeting, and no one stepped up to defend him. But he didn't collapse. He didn't retaliate on stage. He didn't mourn in public. He wrote a memoir, went on tour, started over, and each night, when the sound of Hotel California rises again from the guitar in his hands, the audience understands. Some things can never be taken away, not even glory. How does an artist who once helped write a legend, then was cast out by that very legend, keep going, without hatred, without bitterness, still playing with all his soul? Join Rock Discovery on that journey, from a poor boy in Florida clutching a cheap guitar to the man behind the most immortal ballad in American rock. And if you've ever felt forgotten in the very place you thought you belonged, maybe you'll understand why Don Felder never stopped playing. Early life. Don Felder was born on September 21st, 1947 in Gainesville, a small town in northern Florida, where the harsh sunlight pierced through tin roofs of modest homes, and musical dreams were the kind people only dreamed of in silence. His father was a welder, his mother a homemaker. The family belonged to the working class, far from being able to even consider art as a realistic pursuit. But in that humble home, young Don heard a different sound, not the clash of metal, but the guitar on the radio, echoing from Presley, Chet Atkins, and Southern bluesmen. The first guitar Felder ever had wasn't even a proper instrument. It was a cheap toy, constantly needing repair just to produce something vaguely resembling a note. But still he learned, still he played, still he picked out every tone by ear and memory, because there was no money for sheet music, let alone lessons. Everything was self-taught, from tuning the strings to mastering the fretboard. He had no studio, no mentor, only a guitar and an ever-growing obsession called music. In Gainesville, rock and roll wasn't something people cheered for. In a conservative environment, Felder's passion was seen as deviant, strange, rebellious, untrustworthy. He was teased by peers, discouraged by teachers, even worried his parents, who feared their son might be headed down the wrong path. But Don never backed down. At age 13, he formed his first band called the Continentals, a group that, a few years later, would include another young man who'd go on to change rock history, Stephen Stills. Felder's childhood wasn't marked by dramatic tragedies or tearful losses, but it was the quiet poverty, the silent isolation, and the self-driven yearning with no guidance that shaped a distinct personality, reserved, persistent, unconcerned with attention, but always chasing perfection. He once recalled one of his most vivid memories as a teenager, watching a neighbor's house burn down, the red flames lighting up the night sky, reflected in the strings of his guitar as he sat by the window practicing. Perhaps it was from that moment that the surreal feeling, half beautiful, half unsettling, became the core tone of the music he would later write. Don Felder wasn't born to be a star, but amid the sweltering heat and the loneliness of his youth, he strummed the first notes of a journey no one could have foreseen, not even him. And that's why, every time you hear Hotel California, you're not just hearing music, you're hearing a silent childhood whispering from far away. Early career. After leaving Gainesville in the late 1960s, Don Felder began a restless journey across the eastern United States, searching for a place in the music industry. He joined the Mondi Quintet, a psychedelic rock band that emerged alongside the rise of counterculture. Though the group never made a major mark on the market, it gave Felder valuable experience in songwriting and live performance. Not long after, he moved on to a band called Flow, based mainly in New York, where Felder was first exposed to professional studio recording. Flow signed with CTI Records and released an album in 1970, but soon disbanded. Still, that period opened up a whole new path for him, becoming a session musician, playing guitar for renowned artists, a job that demanded extreme technical skill, discipline, and adaptability. When he relocated to Los Angeles in the early 70s, Felder entered a vibrant yet unforgiving music scene, where most unknown musicians were quickly chewed up and forgotten. But thanks to his solid craftsmanship and professional attitude, he gradually became known in production circles as a great player, low profile, utterly dependable. He played guitar for the Bee Gees, Diana Ross, Barbra Streisand, Michael Jackson, and worked behind the scenes as a technician, arranger, even co-writer on numerous pop, disco, and soul projects throughout the decade, none of which bore his name on the record sleeve. Alongside this studio work, Felder stayed in touch with his old friend Bernie Leadon, who was then a member of a rising country rock band called the Eagles. In 1974, as the Eagles were recording their On the Border album, Leadon invited Felder to sit in on a track titled Good Day in Hell. With his Southern-style slide guitar, Felder brought a completely new energy to the song, powerful, mournful, and unlike the soft country pop sound the band was known for. Impressed by his performance, Eagles leaders Don Henley and Glenn Frey asked Felder to record guitar for another song, Already Gone, and soon after invited him to join the band as a full member. It was the first time the Eagles had ever expanded their lineup, and Felder became the group's fifth man, introducing a richer, more rock-driven, technically complex, and electrified layer to their sound. What's worth noting is this: Don Felder wasn't given the spotlight when he entered the Eagles. He came in as a hired gun, unnoticed, not involved in core songwriting, with no control over the brand. But that quiet presence became the bedrock, because just 2 years later, he would write the iconic opening guitar section to Hotel California, redefining not only the band's future but also his own. For Felder, this wasn't just a job. It was a rare moment when someone quietly stepped through the door of legend. But that door, as we'll see, didn't just lead to glory. It was also the entrance to fractures so deep, he would carry them for the rest of his life. Career success. Joining the Eagles in 1974, Don Felder didn't need time to prove his worth. Right from the first album he contributed to, On the Border, his solid, intricate, rock-infused guitar style helped push the Eagles beyond the safe zone of country pop they had built their name on. On the track Already Gone, he left a sharp signature with a lead guitar part that cut like a razor. But all of that was just a prelude to the sonic revolution that would be Hotel California. In 1976, as the Eagles began work on their fifth album, Felder brought in an instrumental demo with a flamenco-style intro, a haunting chorus, and an oddly structured outro. He titled it, half-jokingly, Mexican Reggae. Don Henley listened and immediately said, "I know we've got something special here." That piece of music would become the foundation for Hotel California, a dark, surreal ballad about a dazzling but empty world, a kind of false paradise that everyone wants to escape, but no one ever can. The song won the 1978 Grammy for Record of the Year, sold tens of millions of copies, and became an emblem of the entire 1970s. But more importantly, the iconic dual guitar solo, played by Felder and Joe Walsh, was later ranked by Guitar World as one of the greatest solos of all time, and became a sonic treasure no classic rock fan could live without. The success of Hotel California rocketed the Eagles to their peak, but also cracked the very foundation of the band. Fame brought pressure, and Henley and Frey's growing hunger for control, along with frustration over unfair profit-sharing, sparked a slow-burning tension. Felder, who had written the most music for the band during this period, began to feel dismissed, excluded from key decisions, and treated like a long-term hired hand rather than a creative partner. Still, he stayed on, contributing to the Long Run 1979 album and performing on the massive world tours, even as the strain became obvious on stage. On the night of the Eagles' final show in 1980 at Long Beach, Felder made a now famous remark before stepping out. "Tonight I'm gonna smash that guitar over his head," referring to Glenn Frey. That show didn't end with fireworks, but with threats, and a silence that would last 14 years. The Eagles disbanded after that night. Felder withdrew from the spotlight, releasing his first solo album, Airborne, 1983, which failed commercially. When the Eagles reunited in 1994 for Hell Freezes Over, he was invited back, but this time under a contract with a controversial clause. Don Henley and Glenn Frey would earn twice as much as the other members. Felder objected, and from that point, nothing was ever the same again. Yet one thing remains undeniable. Don Felder was the man who brought the Eagles to Hotel California, in every sense of the phrase. He didn't sing. He didn't run the band. But the sound he created defined an entire era of American rock. And the irony? The man who built that grand hotel was also the first to be asked to leave it. Fallout and rumors. In 2001, while preparing for a major tour with the Eagles, Don Felder received a brief phone call from the band's manager. He was fired. No group meeting, no farewell, no explanation. Abrupt and cold, as if nearly 3 decades of contribution had never existed. For Felder, it wasn't just a professional blow, it was a personal betrayal. He had once called the Eagles his family, having been with them since the early days when they were still finding their sound between country and rock. He had written, recorded, toured, and endured through their most glorious and chaotic years. And now, over a contract clause and a few financial disagreements, he was cast aside like excess staff. Refusing to disappear quietly, Felder filed a lawsuit against Don Henley and Glenn Frey, accusing them of wrongful termination and financial exploitation. According to the court filings, Felder claimed he received only a fraction of tour and royalty earnings, while Henley and Frey unilaterally modified the contracts to take double, without group consensus. The matter exploded into the public eye. It was no longer an internal rift, but a full-blown war between 3 pillars of the Eagles. Henley and Frey's response was cold and laced with sarcasm. They claimed Felder was obsessed with money, that he hadn't contributed enough to demand equality, and that just because someone plays a good guitar solo doesn't mean they get to call the shots. Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt, the other 2 members, remained silent. The lawsuit dragged on until 2007, ending in a confidential settlement. But the damage was irreparable. Felder never returned to the Eagles. Even after Glenn Frey's death in 2016, Don Henley remained firm. Felder will never come back. Period. But Felder didn't stop at the courtroom. In 2008, he released his memoir, Heaven and Hell, My Life in the Eagles, a book that shook the rock community. He detailed the band's behind-the-scenes drama, meetings held only between Henley and Frey, undisclosed financial splits, manipulation, ego, and the quiet resentments that festered for years. The book quickly became a bestseller, but also branded him a traitor in the eyes of many die-hard fans. Some praised him for having the courage to speak the truth, while others accused him of washing his hands with memory to profit from a legacy he once helped build. And then there were the rumors, never confirmed, that Henley once forced Felder to sign a contract in a bar at midnight. that a fierce argument with Joe Walsh led to 10 years of silence between them, that the riff for Hotel California wasn't just a song, but a quiet challenge to the band's authoritarian leadership model. Amid all the controversy, Felder never raised his voice. He didn't lash out on stage. He didn't rage in interviews. He chose music instead of retaliation. And perhaps that's what makes his story all the more haunting. The man who wrote the most iconic anthem of a generation then was cut out of it, not by gunfire, but by signature. And in the world of rock, where scandals are often tangled with sex, drugs, or violence, Don Felder's story stands as a different kind of tragedy, the tragedy of being forgotten by the very thing you helped create. Personal life. Throughout his golden years with the Eagles, Don Felder seemed to have held on to something many rockers lost along the way: a quiet, stable family behind the scenes. He married Susan Felder in the early 1970s, when his career was just beginning, even before Hotel California ever played its first note. They lived privately, rarely appeared together at public events, but were always there for each other in the moments that mattered. They had 4 children together and lived in a suburban home outside Los Angeles. While other Eagles members dove into alcohol, drugs, and fleeting romances, Felder chose to return home after tours, strum an acoustic guitar for his kids, and take his wife out to dinner on nights off. At one point, he was even referred to as the only Eagle still holding on to a real marriage. But stage lights don't just dazzle, they quietly burn away the most private parts of life. As tensions within the Eagles escalated, Don Felder began slipping into a quiet depression, bringing home unspoken frustrations that lingered in silence. Minor arguments, long, wordless dinners, and gradually, the tours stretched further and longer between the two of them. In 2000, just 1 year before he was fired from the Eagles, Felder and Susan officially divorced. No scandal, no tabloid headlines, just a quiet end to a marriage once believed to be more enduring than the band itself. What followed was emptiness. Felder didn't rush into new love, nor dive into public flings like many middle-aged artists. Instead, he quietly rebuilt himself, touring small venues, writing solo music, meeting fans, and spending time with his now-grown children, scattered across different places. It wasn't until after 2015 that Felder publicly revealed his relationship with Catherine Nicholson, a wellness and media consultant said to have helped him rediscover a sense of peace after years of loneliness and identity loss. They married quietly, no media, no cameras, true to the way Felder always lived, keeping what matters most far from the spotlight. In one rare moment of speaking about his private life, Felder once said, "I lost a musical family, but what hurt more was losing my real family right after. The only thing that saved me back then was the sound of the guitar." And maybe that's why, even long after leaving the Eagles, he continued to perform Hotel California for decades, not to recall a golden age, but to hold on to a fragment of memory, when everything was still intact and he hadn't yet lost what mattered most. Legacy and influence. If the history of American rock were a symphony, Don Felder wouldn't be the loud drummer or the frontman basking in the spotlight. He'd be the haunting guitar line at the bridge, the part that lingers in your mind long after the music stops, without you knowing why. And perhaps that's what defines his unique legacy: quiet, irreplaceable, and resonating far beyond the stage. Across nearly 3 decades with the Eagles, Felder wasn't just the lead guitarist. He was the nameless sound architect who quietly reshaped the band's entire sonic fabric. With a background as a seasoned session player, he brought to the Eagles layered harmonies, dramatic slide and lead guitar lines, and a rare depth of arrangement. Songs like "One of These Nights," "Victim of Love," "Those Shoes," "The Long Run," all bear Felder's imprint in both sound and structure. But his greatest legacy, undeniably, is Hotel California. The original demo, written by Felder in Malibu, was an instrumental titled Mexican Reggae. After Don Henley heard it and penned its metaphor-laced lyrics, the song became a masterpiece, not just for the Eagles, but for the entire 1970s. The gentle intro and the twin guitar solo outro, performed by Felder and Joe Walsh, were ranked by Guitar World among the 5 greatest guitar solos of all time, while Rolling Stone placed Hotel California in the top 50 greatest songs ever written. The bitter truth is, though Felder composed the music for that immortal song, his name is rarely mentioned first. He wasn't the singer, nor the lyricist, nor the public face of the band. Yet for guitarists, from Slash to Steve Lukather to John Mayer, Felder remains a symbol of unflashy innovation, of emotional storytelling through structure and sound. Beyond music, Don Felder represents a different kind of artist, one who helped build a legend only to be pushed out of it. He didn't fight for leadership, didn't clamor for the press, didn't chase the spotlight, and in doing so, became another kind of icon. A symbol of loyalty to the music, of kindness unreturned, and of talent that endured the blows. In 2016, he was inducted into the Musicians Hall of Fame, not as a headline name, but as someone who stood behind the success of others. For Felder, it wasn't just a medal, it was an affirmation. Some musical spirits need no spotlight to light up an era. And every time Hotel California plays, whether in a tiny bar or a stadium of tens of thousands, his melody is what makes everyone stop. No introduction needed, no name required, just that first note. And you know Don Felder never truly left. Present day. Since his unceremonious departure from the Eagles, Don Felder has never looked back. Not because he stopped loving the band, but because he understood. Some doors, once closed, leave behind nothing but echoes. Instead of seeking a way back, Felder carved out his own path. He formed the Don Felder Band and began touring with artists like Styx, REO Speedwagon, and Foreigner, names from the same era, sharing an audience that didn't need social media, just real music. For over 2 decades, he has performed relentlessly, not out of financial need, but because music is the one thing he never abandoned and the one thing that never betrayed him. In 2012, he released the solo album Road to Forever, a reflection on life after the Eagles, absent of bitterness or complaint, filled only with truth and the scars that had healed. Critics praised the album for its emotional depth, sonic variety, and the delicacy of every guitar note. In 2019, he followed up with American Rock and Roll, a full-fledged musical statement featuring an all-star lineup: Slash, Sammy Hagar, Mick Fleetwood, Joe Satriani, Richie Sambora, musicians who had grown up with him or admired him from afar. He also began appearing at community events, music education programs, and mental health advocacy campaigns in the entertainment industry. No longer part of the Eagles, Don Felder instead became a storyteller for a generation long overlooked, a generation of real technique, of raw expression untouched by auto-tune, of souls that didn't need management teams to have something worth saying. In February 2025, during a tour aboard the Rock Legends cruise, Felder suffered a dehydration episode in the middle of performing Tequila Sunrise. He was rushed to the infirmary, still in his stage outfit, drenched in sweat, clutching the neck of his guitar. The news stunned fans, but a few weeks later, he reappeared in a short video, voice hoarse but eyes shining. "I can still play. There are still nights left to finish the story." At nearly 80, Don Felder no longer chases chart rankings. He doesn't need his old band, nor new awards. He only needs a guitar, a stage just big enough, and an audience still willing to listen. And for those who've ever gone still hearing the final solo of Hotel California, that is more than enough. Don Felder doesn't live in the past, but he's never let the past lose its voice. He is proof that when everything breaks, the survivor isn't the one who wins. It's the one brave enough to rise and keep playing. Don Felder was never a name shouted from the rooftops. He didn't stand center stage, didn't hold control, didn't make shocking headlines. But for over half a century, he did one thing, and he did it with his whole soul. He played the guitar. He is living proof of a bitter but beautiful truth in rock and roll. Not everyone who builds a legend gets their name carved into it. Some people, like Felder, create sounds that silence the world, only to be cast aside like a passerby. But they keep living, keep playing, and leave behind music that time cannot erase. From a poor boy in Gainesville teaching himself guitar by ear to the man who wrote the music for Hotel California, Felder never asked for recognition. And maybe that's exactly why his legacy endures far longer than the applause ever could. In an industry full of deception and competition, Don Felder is a rare kind of artist. One who doesn't need to win to survive, who doesn't need to stand out to shine. And perhaps because he never demanded to be remembered, every time his guitar plays, people stop and listen. Because they know that music wasn't made to impress. It was made to last. If you've ever gone still listening to the final solo of Hotel California, if you believe that quiet artists like Don Felder deserve to be remembered, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next stories. And tell us in the comments, when was the first time you heard Hotel California? Because sometimes your memory is the most beautiful part of the story.